Okay, I'm going to start the timer now. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting. Yeah, so actually let me get us into full-on slideshow mode as soon as I figure out my left from my right. And find the cursor. There it is. Okay. So, this is, I'll say, a new talk that's building off of an old talk that is expanding on and off of a book that I wrote, and we'll get into that. But we'll start off with this basic concept of Spaceship Earth 2.0. It's a phrase I've been kind of sitting with for a while that is meant to open up philosophical or theoretical space beyond techno and beyond the dance floor and beyond subjective readings of the experience of listening to the music, and thinking more in terms of infrastructure, more in terms of mapping. So, I have this quote from our Buckminster Fuller that sort of inspired part of this move towards this kind of new space. And part of this inspiration also comes from Sun Ra, who also had a concept of Spaceship Earth. He would say the thing where he's like, you know, the Earth is a vehicle, you can move it and fly through space, and everyone should know that, but you know, we're not using our third eye to imagine the Earth as a living, breathing entity that we are all a part of. So, with Spaceship Earth 2.0, I'm kind of trying to move past a deep nihilism that I've found myself kind of progressively falling into over the last like 15 years or so. And, you know, it's, yeah, thought this is gonna be a fun talk. But but this nihilism comes from, for me, a illicit disappointment with this thing we've chosen to call the future. This thing that we've buffered for, or that a certain group of entrepreneurial pirate type people buffered for 500 years into place this thing we call civilization. And it's failing, it's not working, right? We've been doing this civilization thing properly since around 1945, and it's not looking too hot. I mean, it was actually getting quite hot. There's global boiling, there's no wonder global warming, and there's global boiling points, and the Earth also is rotating in the opposite direction. A polar shift has actually occurred, which is partly why great floods happen. I currently live outside of Vancouver, and there's a myth that I've been I wouldn't even call it a myth, it's just a truth that I've been kind of coming across as I've been like walking trails and looking at like, you know, the historical markers and stuff for the trees. And the First Nations people, they're talk of a flood that occurred 10,000 years ago. And what's interesting is that the provincial government is actually working with First Nations people to think about the possibility of when this flood returns. And this isn't like, you know, I said myth, but this isn't mythology, right? This is just understanding change, understanding motion, understanding, you know, temperaments, understanding behavior, and being empathetic to the behavior of the Earth. And then, you know, we as very bad architects of a thing that we want to call civilization, you know, we should be moving more into like a kind of emotional intelligence with the Earth, and yeah. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. These are like kind of the sketches for it. And it all came out of reading Buckminster Fuller. And it's this particular kind of throwaway quote from his essay, Utopia or Oblivion, that really struck me. Like, it's literally like one line in this entire book where he says this thing about musicians, where he's like, you know, musicians have this ability to think of holistic concepts as like in its prime form. Musicians can actually use sound, space, and perspective, both, you know, the perspective of the performer, but also the audience to share understanding, or to have what Mikhail Bakhtin calls a dialogic imagination. And I'm interested in this possibility of music creating dialogue, creating world systems for us all to cerebrally and physically kind of participate in. So, the last point I'll make about this is that the painting is done by AbuQadim Haqq, who I've been working with for quite some time, and it's been a real honor. He's known for doing a lot of the artwork for Drexciya and Underground Resistance, and has been doing techno art for the last 33 years, and it's been really interesting working with him, because he's kind of like, do you all remember that show Heroes? Remember, like, he's not like Isaac the Painter, but he's kind of like Isaac the Painter, where he like shows up with these like very like abstract, you know, kind of comic, not like comic books, but comics in the sense of like, you know, the way that Marvel is like a stand-in for the CIA. It's like that sort of thing, where he shows up with this painting one day and it's like Spaceship Earth 2.0. And I was like, okay, cool, that's where we're going next, got you. Yeah. You know, because in the final Drexciya records, there was 7 albums, the Storm albums, in which Drexciya summoned a flood to colonize it, or it's a movement they call surface terrestrial colonization. So Drexciya begins flooding the Earth, that started last year, and there's a portal that moves us off into space. And yeah, Hawke's third Earth vision, as he calls it, sort of led me into Spaceship Earth 2.0. So, but let's go backwards. So 2 years ago, I published a book called Assembling a Black Counterculture that is ostensibly a history and techno-vernacular activation of the history and mechanics of techno music and the idea of books as a whole. It's not really a book that you read cover to cover, but it's designed to be read cover to cover, but also designed to kind of to take you off the path of the book for several hours at a time and then kind of come back to it. And to this day, I still find myself kind of worming in and around the book. But the thing about it is that the phrase assembling with the ing, this continuing assemblage, is a really important part of how I've been exploring techno music, which the mechanics of which we will get into a bit more in a second. But basically how the book was written was that I started with the first techno songs from Cybotron, so around 1981, Allies of Your Mind, and basically went through Discogs and looked at every single techno release starting in Detroit, and basically wormed through Discogs and charted them out in chronological order. And what I found in that was that there were like liner notes. Sometimes there were throwaway, like kind of single lines. Sometimes they'd be like block text. And these releases would go from like, I think it was 1981 until Carl Craig's Dia exhibition in 2020. So, you know. So yeah, there's two things that was happening there. You have these liner notes that tell a sort of speculative story. And then there's the real world aspects of what's happening, in which, you know, there's interviews around the releases, there's press notes, there's lyrics, and through citation, there's several different narrative strands, both real and fictional, happening all at once. And the entire point of the book is to explore this black space in which the Hegelian dialectic is dissipated. You know, we're not dealing with good or bad, we're not dealing with left or right, we're dealing with something a bit more prime. And by prime, I mean truth. So, and part of the truth here is another one of these sort of prophetic paintings from AbuQadim Haqq, which takes place in the year 2100, which is one of the mysteries of the book that hasn't really been explored yet, is that the cover is not, it does not take place in the book. The cover is an amalgamation of all of the things that occur in the book, and then it creates a possibility space outside and after the book for us to move towards. And I like to tell people that we're not going to be alive when this painting takes place. We're going to be dead for quite some time, and the Earth will be at a critical boiling point. But these folks will be working on a new future. And the possibility of that we'll get into in the next slide once I get away from this. Haha. So, my studies in techno, the music that people love to dance to, it started actually with me. It started first from hearing Cybotron at a young age. My dad was always playing Clear and things like that. And other electro tracks like Jam On It from Nucleus. He was playing a lot of George Clinton. So I received techno from an angle closer to funk and maybe like prog rock or something. I didn't, though my parents, would go to, I guess, what you would call raves. And they would go to Detroit, Chicago, and, have these like sort of dorm parties. I received it in that context, but then there was also, when I was in college, I stumbled across this book called The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler. And I was interested in the way that he was doing a lot of future casting, and interested in this idea of this term techno-rebels, of people who were not intended to use militarized technology, and they get their hands on this technology and they use it in ways that the military did not intend. At the time that I was reading this book, the iPhone had just started reaching people's hands. And as a kid who had been on the internet for a really long time, my dad's an accountant, so like we had a computer and like dial-up internet all throughout the 90s, so I was like 6 years old, like looking up wormholes and shit, like as a kid, and it's like, just like serial experiments laying myself, and really like appreciated this text explaining what happened to me. And when I Googled techno-rebel, the person that came up was Mon Atkins, which blew my mind, was that there was this other person around my dad's age who was thinking some of the same things. So, this is back also when like indie rock was big, when like Animal Collective and the Timber Trap and stuff was like really popular. So there was no reason to talk about Detroit techno. Even though I was writing for Tiny Mixtapes, there was no reason. So this is like my little secret where I was taking like YouTube rips, YouTube like vinyl rips and saving on my iPod, and like that's how I heard Drexciya tracks, because you couldn't actually go buy them at the time because there's only like 50 presses of them sometimes, which we'll get into that in a second too. But before we do that, I'll do a quick like meteorological breakdown of this Toffler chart, which is at the beginning of the book. So you open the book, you flip to the first page, and there's 2 maps. And that begins your role-playing game adventure through this techno-vernacular history. But essentially, to wrap this up, it took early humans, the Homo erectuses and the Neanderthals and all of those like pre-human figures, it took them a millennia to crawl out of animalness into agriculture and to start, we'll say, participating with the land, cultivating it, growing plants, manicuring it. And then humans got a little greedy and they started, building up partitions around that land, and that's when the sort of psychotic civilization thing kind of started, right around that third tier there, industrial era. Between the agriculture and industrial era, there's a need to pull from the land and to pull from our bodies and to pull from our minds a lot more. And this is where techno gets interesting, is that, sometimes there's people, like in the Matrix, who wake up and they look up and they go, wow, there's these really weird like skyscrapers popping up. What is that about? Some people actually look into it, and you don't hang out with those people. But, which is why I probably shouldn't be here. But I appreciate you listening to my trauma of the future that never came. Because that's the thing, I usually tell people, so okay, that 4th wave there, that was 2020. This was supposed to be the move into Web3, the move into non-fungible tokens and into a sort of new, even more abstract version of the internet. Because like the information age is completely built off of the idea of, particularly Americans, moving off the gold standard, detethering money from a physical object and making it speculative. or as Marx says, everything that's solid melts into air, and they made it air. And then it continued until it formed into a cloud. And that cloud marks this fourth wave. But then we got COVID, a different kind of cloud. And things get interesting, because right here, I usually like to tell people, this part right here is where we are right now. That now was in 1980 when Juan Atkins was working on techno. This is where we are now, right where the hypothetical carrying capacity of Spaceship Earth is being surpassed, hence Spaceship Earth 2.0, to try to look at things a little differently because we keep fucking it up. But okay. So, before we talk about mistakes, we'll talk about the first mistake. There's this Nick Land quote that there's a trauma that happened far before the Big Bang that we can't remember. And I love thinking about that trauma, thinking about, that civilization that was here way, way, way before the ones that we mythologize, like Rome, like the ones way back there. And I think about how they fucked up and how that led, this like steamroll effect of mistakes. Because that's part of what Spaceship Earth 2.0 is thinking differently, right? And thinking about humans and going, the Enlightenment project, as Jessica mentioned earlier, it didn't work. It was a myth. It was all the idea of a bunch of academics working for royals to create, I don't know, a carrot to dangle in front of people for 500 years? And so I want to think about humans in a different way. Humans as if we couldn't do it. What if we stopped being so optimistic about humans and went, we can't do it? That's why we're here, because we actually can't be better. We can't stop Israel. We can't, stop America. We can't stop we actually can't be good. And, and it's at that point of total just like self-humiliation, right? That humans should come to a point of self-realization and then hopefully step into self-actualization to go, we fucked up for a long, we killed Jesus. It's a funny quote that black people say all the time. It's like, hey, they killed Jesus, they'll do anything. and this is where techno comes in. It really is. I mean, it's the 17-year-old kid who's, dad was booking like jazz shows, but also went to jail for prison and money laundering. And it's this kid who lived in a city that was purported to be the future, that had an Elon Musk of the yesteryear, Henry Ford, building the future, and he watched that collapse. He watched and had to grow up in the aftermath of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X's assassination, and this point at which, pre-identity politics, when, the understanding of race and civil rights was a statistical reality and not an identitarian one. This Juan Atkins and techno comes out of this failure, out of the image of Martin Luther King being this person who's bringing peace to the world, and then they killed him. And the rest of the world keeps going on with this hope, which the phrase hope, ironically, comes out of the civil rights movement, out of this sense of, where I'm from. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. My grandmother worked at the jail where Martin Luther King was jailed, and went to the same elementary school as Angela Davis. We can kind of go down that trail after. But point being, is I've had to grow up with elders who just sit and listen to CNN all day and shake their heads. And my grandma, she doesn't leave the house because she's just like, but when she saw my book, she went, damn, you got a lot to say. And then ironically, she writes a book called Future Past You Wouldn't Want to Miss. And I'm still trying to figure that out, where I'm like, man. And the thing is, Juan Atkins, too, had a grandmother who played a Hammond B3 organ. She was doing some work for Motown in, actually similar to Flying Lotus's grandmother, who also worked for Motown. If you think of it like kind of like as a blue-collar job or something, there are a lot of normal people working for Motown, making, backing tracks, doing engineering work, and when Detroit collapsed, the entire music industry of that city collapsed. I mean, so if you scale this down to Melbourne, it's as if Soft Center can't exist because the city has collapsed under divestment from the government. And, you know, we don't want Soft Center to go away. So, yeah, that's how I feel about techno. Whereas this thing that, you know, my Star Trek loving father, you know, my economist, Star Trek loving father, the socialist, like, person, my mom who grew up in the 80s, like, you know, in New York and saw hip hop and freestyle like rise, you know, I see techno as a music that has failed, that has been failed for them. And it's, anyway, what is techno? That is the question. Similar to how Deleuze asked, what is philosophy? I am asking, what is techno? But but this is serious. Because no, I mean, think about it. We've been in a military-industrial complex since 1945, and we still don't know what is techno. We don't know the degree to which we've been cybernated, the degree to which there are microplastics in our bodies, the degree to which, you know, our brain waves can actually move in parallel with the same microwaves that go into the phone so that Instagram can actually predict your thoughts in real time. And this is a scientific reality, that brain waves and the same microwaves that go into your phone, yeah, they can talk to each other, they can sing, and there's dimensional overlap that happens. And that's what I'm interested in with techno, is this idea of touching a machine and talking to it. And that's something Juan Atkins would say a lot. He's like, I just make my machines talk to each other. And so what techno is, it is music that sounds like technology and not technology that sounds like music. So not Kraftwerk. It can never be Kraftwerk because Kraftwerk is technology that sounds like music. You know, they were actually students of Stockhausen. Kraftwerk was actually funded by the German state because, you know, Karl, I forgot his last name, but Karl, you know, he was an aristocrat. He got a lot of grant money from Daddy's friends. And that's, you know, they got Roland and Yamaha and all these like gear companies to soup up Kraftwerk and to use them as a billboard for music technology. So, you know, it's like an animatronic Chuck E. Cheese band or something. You know, you stick Kraftwerk up there, they're like Germans, you know, they're like, yeah, this is the future. We're not in the future, but here's our vision of the future. And Juan Atkins approached this differently, from a more animistic standpoint of thinking of the 808 as a person, thinking of his Korg MS-10 not as half of a Korg MS-20, but as like, you know, a friend that he could go talk to. And I think a lot about how he transferred his bass playing. He would like kind of do this thing where he like paint his face, and like when he was like, I think he was like 10 years old, and he was like talking about in one interview, where he used to play like a bass guitar, hook it up to this like amp, and like, you know, there's something more than the club that's being gotten at. But really quickly, I'm going to play a Juan Atkins track called Sound of Stereo, just so that we can get the aural image in our head. What did we not hear in that song? And it was boom, 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 boom. There was no boom, boom, boom. Like, yes, there's a downbeat, but there's no focus on it. The beat rolls off of it. There's funk, there's groove. So, techno at least as it was imagined by One-Ikens in 1981, a number of years before, you know, old dude in Frankfurt whose name I can't remember, DJ Tala, something like that. You know, before he like looked at some Gary Newman records and was like, no, we're gonna call that techno. Years before that, One-Ikens went making blocky sounding machines with, you know, tube transitors and stuff missing in them, making them work together and move in a groove. It's techno, not boom, 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 boom. See, boom, boom, boom is ignorance. See? and I mean that like more than in like, in just like it's simple music. I mean this literally by pointing to someone like Stockhausen who actually had the term pointus music, or thinking about someone, you know, like, oh my God, I can't think of his name right now. Bukla dude. I just keep thinking of Suzanne Ciani when I should be thinking about this other dude, which is great. Yes, Morton Subotnick. You know, I asked him actually once, like I asked him about his quote where he was like, you know, electronic music or dance music is, you know, several beats in a row, and you know, he turns the knob and he's like, this is how you make dance music, and it's simple. And I asked him about that, and he was like, I don't know, I was just saying some shit. But I think about that. I think about having military technology, like literally like military technology, and going boom, 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 boom. And what that says about humans. Like, just being real, just thinking in terms of a dialogic imagination, just thinking about how much can be imagined within a space of time. And then, this is where I was supposed to transition to talking about house music. Yes, because the opposite of techno is not boom boom, actually. The boom boom is what Roland Barthes calls a third thing. When usually like someone like Immanuel Kant says like, you know, two truths come together, you like rub out a third truth. In this case, two farces come together and you get a boom boom. And the farce here is the misinterpretation of techno, which is more of a vernacular conversation with machinery, and house music, which takes place in Chicago a full 3 or 4 years after techno, right after Frankie Knuckles buys a 909 drum machine that Derek May stole from One, and One-Ikens is like, why did you give those dudes in Chicago like a drum machine so that they can go make a, you know, cheaper version of my music and then sell it to Europe, and everyone thinks house music came first, and Derek went, rent money. So, you know, there's some like class struggle going on here. But the thing that they didn't know was that Frankie Knuckles worked for Billboard, and he was an A&R. So he wasn't just this underground person. He was brought to Chicago from New York to do A&R work. He was there to play the earliest Janet Jackson and Whitney Houston records. You know, he was there to play Clive Davis hits on the floor and to see how people respond. He was a stats analyst and a spook. But the thing here is what I like about One is that he actually had definitions for all these things, which is what makes it so ridiculous when I was working for magazines like Mixmag and, you know, Resident Advisor, was that there are actual dated quotes of how to define this music that goes completely the other way from like those websites like Gear Sluts and stuff. And basically, what house music is a collection of exclusive records that exists like a house wine at the warehouse club, and then later the power plant. So you have a white label like Whitney Houston record that you get straight from, you know, the Arista Records record label, and Frankie Knuckles goes, there's only 2 of these in existence and I got one. And so you go to the warehouse club to hear that track. That is house music. There is no genre called house. There is only a distribution function called house. Which goes into a great quote from Kojo Eshin, who, as a British journalist for The Wire and a lawyer, because he was getting his legal degree while writing this book, he's also the son of a diplomat who did a lot of work on the founding of Ghana, which is quite interesting as well, and all these things work parallel. But Kojo Eshin noticed in Britain that these Drexciya records and these underground resistance records were getting really marked up, and he was very interested in this idea of limited press, of scarcity, and the way that colonialism could actually be mapped and scaled down to the dance music market, which is essentially a few poachers like Neil Rushton from London, who is the person who famously brought over a bunch of Motown tracks in the 70s to England and created the Northern Soul movement, which was like a direct copy. They even had bands like the other Isley Brothers that were like playing. So this is where your modern tribute bands come from. Neil Rushton in the 80s hears about house music, and it's like, I'm gonna go to Chicago and get some of this house. But actually, I stole music from Detroit 30 years ago, so maybe there's more music there. And lo and behold, he finds techno and puts together the new dance sound of Detroit, and techno enters the world, and the history is screwed up ever since. But what we get in this is this delusion of innovation that exists throughout electronic music and the music industry as a whole and the tech industry. But we also get a minimizing of emotional affect, a minimizing of these experiences, these thoughts, and this musicality by taking the initial innovation, and then, you grow it by grabbing an artist, you tour them around, you maybe book their friends, or you book some other artist from another town and be like, hey, you take his sound, And Drake does it all the time, right? He's like, hangs out with The Weeknd and then cuts him out, steals tracks from, or remember when Drake signed to Boy Better Know? And that album never came? We never got the Grime Drake album? Yeah. That kind of thing. This goes way back. Because you have to understand, Juan Atkins was up against Whitney fucking Houston. You can't beat that with drum machines. And I think about that a lot. So, Whitney Houston and Clive Davis, they just take one to work, and you get these 3 record labels that emerge at the end of a 100-year period of monopolization of music and intellectual properties. And then COVID happens, and a discontinuity happens where suddenly, after the entire, stock records became more scarce, they eventually became valueless because these records were being transferred to CDs. And then they were being digitized to MP3s. And then, obviously now we use streaming, we don't even get the files. We don't even touch the music anymore. And so there's a discontinuity of value that is destroying or destroyed the music industry, which during COVID and afterwards, people tried to use non-fungible tokens to bring the value to music back. That didn't work. But TikTok is seemingly where people are gonna go next, and that's a whole different talk if you want that one. Because we can talk about TikTok. And then obviously AI and how AI is for TikTok. But actually what I'm interested in here is the delusion. So we go back to Juan Atkins's bandmate, Rick Davis, who was a veteran from Vietnam. He was a decade older than Juan Atkins and actually saw some stuff out there. His job was to literally protect a CIA lab. He was there to study the Vietnamese people, to fight them, the Viet Cong, to go fight them. He was also there to, he was also there because statistically speaking, more black people were drafted for that war, and then white nationalists were drafted for that war than any other group in the country. So you get this other thing that happens where the hippies suddenly emerge while he's over there fighting for his life, spreading the American influence in the East. He comes back home, uses his check from the military to buy a bunch of synthesizers years before Juan, and blows that kid's mind. He meets Juan and just tells him all of this stuff. Has him read Dahlgren, he's reading Scientology texts, and Juan Atkins is like, my head! And techno comes out of that, out of talking to this man who actually does dress like this, and who knows the underbelly of the world, knows the actual deep Bataille-like essence within the Western world. So I'll play a track from him really quick, as soon as I get my mouse down here. Yeah, exactly. Here's a song, Methane Sea. I believe this is from 1975. as he says here, the purpose was to put a virus out through the music industry. He understood the music industry. He actually understood how those things worked and taught Juan how to self-release records. And what they went and released their first album on the same record label as Dave Brubeck and Sylvester, which is like quite interesting. And this virus being misinterpreted as a fun plaything for countries being brought into the American influence is again particularly interesting given its origin point. But that's again what Spaceship Earth 2.0 is about. It's about me having absorbed all of this history, absorbing all of these quotes, and seeing the point, being like, I see what you're talking about, Rick. And his answer to that was to destroy it all. Okay, we'll skip that and go straight for Techno City. What he wanted to do was to use music as a way to imagine worlds. And so him and Juan got together, and years before Drexciya, they started thinking about this thing called the grid, which is a possibility space that emerges when you listen to their music. It's a space where, through the lyrics, through the sounds, you close your eyes with the music, and you're suddenly there, in this other place. This place where the future actually did come, where we actually do have universal basic income. And, we've demilitarized, and we're using, like, all of the musicians are scientists, and the scientists are also the military, but the military doesn't actually, it doesn't kill people, they study things to make things better. And the grid is just a space for this Vietnam vet to go, to imagine if humans didn't fuck up. And out of that came some really killer songs. And I literally mean killer in the sense that Cybotron's Clear is about both the nuclear bomb, but also about a thing that in Scientology is called the clear, when you have a clear perception of the world once you've gathered all of the necessary knowledge to know that it doesn't work. And I can't find clear right now. So, we'll skip it because we all know that song. At least thanks to Missy Elliott, we all know that song. So, I'm going to skip ahead, actually. First, I'll show you that. This is the manifestation of the Enlightenment. The final piece of Enlightenment philosophy that actually hasn't been taken that seriously is called stackology. It's a phased past philosophy in which we start thinking of the world as a computer stack and brains as computer processors. And this is the entire point of the American pragmatic movement, which actually follows up the Enlightenment, but didn't quite make it over into Europe as like dominant thought. And so suddenly you have folks like John Locke and William James, and William James taught W.B. Du Bois. William James, founded psychology. Du Bois founded sociology using stats that he had gathered from Black Americans, the first sociological demographic. And these pragmatic thinkers later became entrepreneurs. They became these like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk types who like philosophize with their money and with their infrastructure. So the stack is this final piece that we're in that there's not really a lot of philosophy actually about. There's a lot of gestural texts about the poetics of the cloud and, lots of things about memes and avatars, but nothing about the exact way that our brains are linked up to the ionosphere and the exact actual psychological capacity here, or carrying capacity that we all have for these frequencies floating around us. And again, there's not actually a lot of study on how we've been cyberdated, but what I do know is that the University of Santa Cruz has a department called the History of Consciousness. And I do know that the US government and its military was very interested in the nature of consciousness. And that had a lot to do with the founding of the counterculture that we all fetishize to this day. Because when I named my book Assembling a Black Counterculture, I wasn't talking about hippies. Rick Davis hated hippies because he was a veteran. Charles Manson was a hippie. And so when I said assembling a black counterculture, what I meant was counter to the counterculture. What I meant were all the folks, like my family, who had to live in the aftermath of the civil rights movement and the aftermath of hippies, just like in 2020, having taken hold of the black liberation movement for their game, for their playtime. I wanted to assemble a counterculture in which, as a black person, as a black American who grew up in the rough edge of the civil rights movement, to have a sense of clarity about what people think is appropriate to do with our time in liberation. And I'll say there's an interesting parallel with October 7th as well, where I think some people aren't on the side that they think they are, because we love the party. We love partying at the end of the world. Because, as Jessica said earlier, sacrifice and intelligence, they all have there's something in common there. Because I'm not just interested in artificial intelligence, I'm also interested in central intelligence. Authentic intelligence. I'm very interested in this history of consciousness and what happens, again, when a liberation technology is shared with the world and the world has fun with it. So, my last album, Techxodus, comes from this knowledge. It's watching the BLM movement get co-opted, both by black folks and by everyone else. And when I say black folks, I mean like the Black Lives Matter movement having, stolen millions of dollars. I was very aware of that. But I was also aware of, the whole identity politics thing spreading around the world. And everyone going, my identity is important here and not the actual legal precedent for different specific peoples in their specific, we'll just say militarized legal standpoint, epistemology. We were not empathizing with each other. Everyone stepped into their ego and went, me. And because of that, Israel has a giant AI weaponized thing called the fucking gospel that rains terror, automated terror onto people. That happened while everybody was partying during BLM. Because the thing is, the move that Derek Chauvin used on George Floyd was taught by the IDF. The IDF trains the NYPD. But again, what is techno? But I'll leave us off on this final little snippet of music. It's not going to be my music because you'll get to hear that tomorrow. And just know that I'm not like Juan. I'm not like Drexia. I hate everybody. so my music is not, it's just, hate is not the opposite of love. It's just it's a texture. And so I'll leave you some nice words from Juan.
DeForrest Brown Jr. Holy shit. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello, thank you for that awesome talk. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the origins of the technology that they're using. You talked about how it's a military thing, but what was it used for by the military, and how did it end up in the hands of people that were using it for another reason?
Excellent question. Thanks. So, actually, oh wait, it's already gone. So that slide that was up before with like Cybotron, this answers your question. It's just like a roundabout way. Beside it, you saw like a redacted document. So I wrote that last year for a new Cybotron record that's on its way, and it's working to be the sequel of the book that I wrote. So my book ends in 2020 with Carl Craig's Dia exhibition, in which he like seals off techno in this like party after party, and we've all like talked about this. It's like a really fun like Dungeons and Dragons thing we've all kind of been doing. But he seals it off, you know, and me and Doppler Effect, Drexia, we like set up this like exhibition to kind of plot next steps. And the slides. Okay. So this redacted document is the first steps towards a sequel to the book outside of book form. And it starts by exploring re-exploring a story and cited notes from, I believe it's chapter 4 of the book, Japanese Technology, about a guy named Don Lewis, who was also a veteran. He fought in the Korean War. He's actually from Alabama and made music for the Civil Rights Movement, went to college with my aunt at Tuskegee University, But he also worked at Area 51 as a nuclear scientist in the military. And there, he learned to do a thing called circuit bending, where he would take circuits and make machines talk for the military, except those machines that were talking were the first intercontinental ballistic missiles. And that he also just so happened to be an expert at the Hammond B3 organ and worked for them. So he quit the military. He was like, I'm done playing with alien technology and reverse engineering it. I'm gonna go and make music for Michael Jackson's Disney 3D ride. And tour with Frank Zappa and The Who. And so he goes off and he's playing the Hammond B3 organ, and he comes across an Ace-Tone rhythm computer, which is an early drum machine. And he hotwires that, circuit bends it into the Hammond B3 organ and creates rhythm and soul music. So soul on the keys, rhythm on the drum or rhythm computer. And that's a lot of where my music comes from, is an exasperation of this initial moment. So that's covered in the book in a practical sense, where Don Lewis begins to work with Iketaro Kakahashi, who's the founder of Roland, and he, at that company, becomes a contract worker for them in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, and he basically designs the 808, puts the sounds in it. This black dude put the sounds in the 303, he invented MIDI essentially, but got none of the actual copyright stuff for it, because he was a contract worker. Roland got that, but also the Dave Smith dude who gave that talk in New York in 1984, I think it was, when they founded MIDI. That's who got the credit, a decade later. Because this guy was touring a thing called the Live Electronic Orchestra, where he had all these early rhythm computers and things like that all strung up together. But the American Musicians Union basically sued him because they were like, we can't have you up there being a one-man band. That'll put us out of work. You can't be Drake. Except Drake isn't even Drake because he can't play several instruments at once. So Drake actually can't do much. He can't even run when he's getting shot at. It's actually, but no, this is important. The sort of danger thing, Drake doesn't see danger coming, which is why Kendrick Lamar came and just really quick, and he's like, oh, I don't know what's happening. That's what colonialism does to you. It turns you into pigeons. But someone who understood. But the point I'm getting at is that Don Lewis made this technology from military intelligence for a corporation, ironically by a person who, Hidegard Kakashi, who grew up under air fire from the US military during World War II. You know, they came together and made these machines that one Atkins later bought at a discount at a pawn shop because these machines didn't even sell. That's the whole reason I know techno was invented in Detroit, is because the 808's drum machine wasn't even available to most people at any point, honestly, until the clones were starting to be released in the late 2000s. So, I mean, that's why there's like fetish items for them now. I think someone in Brisbane yesterday was telling me that an 808 runs for like 7,000 American dollars here. Yeah. Anyway, that's the connection, is that there's a lot of military folks who did some stuff, and yeah, we're all in it. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Does anyone else have a question? Surely.
DeForrest, did you say that you listened to every techno track from 1981 to 2020?
Yes.
Every single one?
Yes. So here's a little secret about me. Besides like having like an insane like hyper focus, which this book has technically been in the works since I was a kid, it just wasn't about techno at the time. The speculative fictions, that's a whole different thing, which that's for the talk that comes after Spaceship Earth 2.0. After I, you know, have a sense of clarity and can forgive the world. but yeah, so I was a music journalist for the last like 12 years or so. Was an editor at Mix Mag, wrote for Resident Advisor sometimes when they weren't being asses. Wrote for DJ Mag when they weren't being asses, NPR. Like I've written for a lot of places, but particularly one of the jobs I had was working for Red Bull Music Academy during the Mike Brown protests, which particularly low point in my life, like economically, but like Red Bull was like, hey, we want you to come and transcribe all of our lectures. And I did that. I watched all of them and transcribed for money. But not just for the money, it was for the knowledge, because, you know, years later, Red Bull shuts down and the archive starts getting deleted. And I'm very grateful to this day that I spent a whole summer just like hoofing down this stuff and cross-referencing it with other things that I learned in college, like American pragmatism. And so yeah, any question you got, we can go.
Any question you got? We can go.
Thanks so much. I'm a huge fan of your record, Black National Sonic Weaponry, and I was just curious about, I think the way you link Henri Lefebvre's ideas of rhythm analysis to the music, and how it actually frees up electronic music rhythmically in a way which is very uncommon. And I was just wondering if you could, I guess, recommend any other artists who are doing that, or it's just you? Because it's actually, when the first time I heard it, it opened up a really incredible strain of potential that comes out of both techno, but also other forms of electroacoustic and avant-garde concrete and so forth, and also just the brass elements. And so, yeah, I'm just fascinated how you linked those philosophical concepts to the music in making that work, and also is there anyone you're aware of for your journalistic and archival work that's doing kind of similar, or is pursuing similar paths?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's, so, okay. Starting with the brass comment, so I played trumpet since I was like 7. My dad taught me, and I played in marching band, like concert band, jazz band, all through college. And I was in Alabama and played in this marching band called the Pride of Dixie, which actually grafted the entire, so W.C. Handy, the person who anthropologically discovered the blues, as a folk music, and like notated it, sold off these like notations to record labels up in New York. He's from this town that I went to college in. So there's a town, like this basically like small white supremacist town with like a statue of a black dude in the middle of it with like a trumpet who discovered the blues. And this marching band, the Pride of Dixie marching band, grafted the entirety of blues and orchestrated it for marching band using the abstractions that Dave Brubeck and George Gershwin, took from W.C. Handy years later. So one thing I'll get at is that there is no rhapsody in blue. You can't be up when you're blue. It's that's how you know it's stolen. Or I won't say stolen, we'll say grafted, borrowed. But I bring this up because the rhythm analysis work is a really particular one because it comes out of both actually doing marching band, so having to play these like crazy like Rhapsody in Blue, like kind of Blue Rondo a la Turk runs on trumpet. I was like 31 out of 33 trumpets in like a 200-piece like marching band, and it was just this intense like physical experience that gave me a really intuitive sense of music that I'm really grateful for. And just not in terms of like playing it, but actual physicality and like endurance to play, these like 10-minute long like moving orchestra sets. But at the same time as that, I was studying philosophy, a lot of American pragmatic philosophy and critical theory and stuff like that, and came across Henri Lefebvre's Critique of Everyday Life. And the irony that rhythm analysis is actually the final chapter of that book, Separated, often sold for quite a bit of money for what's just like one chapter of a book. But I always find how things are edited to be really interesting, and why a chapter like rhythm analysis wouldn't be at the end of a book called Critique of Everyday Life. And when school shootings were kind of getting big, and the 2008 crash was happening, and Iraq, Afghanistan was getting a bit long, to that point where all Americans were like, okay, maybe, they're waking up from the stupor and they're like, maybe this is wrong. During that time, I was reading rhythm analysis and thinking about all these things. And that all basically went into my music journalist work, because thinking about these things. And I say all of this to say, no, I don't actually know anyone who's thinking about rhythm quite the way that I am. I mean, there's similar people like Jay Lin or like Ibram Alpha Jr. or Tecker, because actually one thing I do love about Tecker is that they're literally just making New York electro, but like time stretched like quadruple the speed backwards, and that's all it actually is. It's just like the decay of like electro, but like it's really beautiful in that too. But the physics of rhythm, I think, is something that's been explored technologically, but not so much musically in electronic music. I think, even when you think about breaks, like break beats, it's just one song being like a slice of a song, and you get a whole genre of music that goes boop boop pop da da pop, and it's like I can do that with my mouth. So why would we have a machine do it? That's what I mean about us not having thought enough about how cybernative we are, to the point that we accept loop, we accept repetition that we create ourselves. That fishbowl mentality is quite interesting to me when we're supposed to be jettisoning towards the future, when we're supposed to be in an accelerationist movement into the future, and everyone's like kind of slowing down. That's interesting to me. And actually Kraftwerk had a lot to say about that too, about how people were not adapting to their music fast enough. And so, musically speaking, I'm not thinking about rhythm in terms of dance, I'm thinking about rhythm in terms of physical possibility, and thusly into the possibility spaces, similar to and expanded from Cybotron. So, that's mostly why I brought up writing the liner notes for the new Cybotron record, is that this is a furthering of that rhythm analysis, of letting go of even my own music, and using Techxodus, this last record, in which we moved from the atonist world order, which that little red thing up there is 2008. That's when I first started really digging into techno. And then over here is 2023 when the album came out. The atonist world order, named after Berlin Atonal, but also the atonist sort of Illuminati group from Ishmael Reed's Mumbo Jumbo, which met him in college, and that was a whole thing. He was just like, fuck him up. And I was like, okay, thanks, Dad. But it's a move from that into the extra myth-science world. So combining Quentin Malayu's sort of idea of extra science fictions with Sun Ra's idea of myth-science, and moving away from, again, it's this idea of clarity. And so, by working on Cybotron, I've essentially grabbed hold of the cybertronic technology that everybody missed because they were raving. And now, I'm Oz, writing, I'm the architect in the Matrix, and that's kind of where this is moving next, is into speculative fiction for Juan Atkins, for the inventor of techno. I take this thing, I craft this world to give him something, to help him with clarity, which is what this whole project, the book and everything, was actually about, was seeing these people who actually went through some things and like trying to psychoanalyze them and like, yeah, just out of an actual like love for the music and love for their perspective. So yeah, rhythm analysis will get, that'll have a lot to do with where I move into the future, because I'm named the rhythm analyst in this. So that's, yeah, we can talk more about this casually. Because that's, again, another talk. But yeah, if there's time for another question, or it's up to you.
I think that's all we have time for, unfortunately.
Event time over.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.